Well, good morning. Welcome to this virtual sermon here on Facebook Live. My name is Bob Malone. I'm the pastor at Mount Vernon Presbyterian Church here in Alexandria, Virginia. And on behalf of our entire leadership team, I'd like to welcome you. This morning, we will be looking at our study of the book of Galatians. And today is the third in a four-part sermon series. It is Sunday, February 12th, 2023, and I'm delighted to be with you this morning. We here at Mount Vernon firmly believe that in the Bible, we find the Word of God. But we also recognize that God speaks to us in a variety of other ways as well. In our live worship gathering at 10:30 this morning, we will be reading from the book of Galatians. But this morning, my sermon also finds some of its roots in a poem by Mary Oliver titled The Lily. I invite you to listen now to the poetry of God's faithful people. Night after night, darkness enters the face of the lily, which lightly closes its 5 walls around itself, and its purse of honey, and its fragrance, and its contents. To stand there in the garden, not quite sleeping, and maybe saying in lily language some small words we can't hear, even when there is no wind anywhere. Its lips are so secret, its tongue so hidden. Or maybe it says nothing at all, but just stands there with the patience of vegetables and saints until the whole earth has turned around and the silver moon becomes the golden sun, as the lily absolutely knew it would, which is itself, isn't it, the perfect prayer. Church, this is the poetry of the faithful. Thanks be to God. What exactly is the perfect prayer? Surely it is more than a request, more than asking, pleading, demanding, more than even words. Perhaps, in the spirit of Pulitzer Prize winning poet Mary Oliver, it is a stance or an approach that we take towards God, toward ourselves, toward our world. Perhaps the perfect prayer is more about the way we position ourselves in this world. More like an attitude or a mindset than about the words that we speak. But I only say perhaps because while I may resonate with Oliver, I would never dare to claim to have the defining word on what the perfect prayer really is, if there even is such a thing. Because as is the case with so many of the disciplines and practices of our faith, prayer is both vaguely mystical and deeply personal. I don't know what the perfect prayer is. Neither does Mary Oliver. But having acknowledged that, I think we can also affirm that however one might choose to define or describe prayer, it must always begin with grace. God's grace. For us. For me, for you, for one another, for our world. In fact, more and more, I'm discovering that I'm not sure that there is a more essential element to the worldview of a Christ follower than grace. It is central not only to our understanding of prayer, but to everything about our walks with God as well. And that is why any study of Paul's letter to the churches in Galatia must include a discussion of grace. So this morning, as we consider the third G in Galatians, after growth and Gentiles, grace now takes center stage. How do you understand grace? How do you define it? I'd love to see your responses in the chat this morning. For the longest time, I defined grace as God's giving us what we do not deserve. That was the definition that I was taught as a child. We didn't deserve God's forgiveness, God's acceptance, God's love, because we were broken, flawed. But God's grace changed all that. And though we may not deserve it, God, because of what Jesus did on the cross, is now able to love us. And that love, well, that love is not something that we can earn. That was an important message of Protestantism, where it was believed that the Roman and Orthodox churches were all about good works and following the laws of the church in order to become worthy of God's mercy. The Protestant Reformation, armed with the words of Paul to the Galatians as evidence, taught that salvation was the result of grace, and grace alone, not works. Salvation, being in right standing with God, experiencing God's love, none of that can be earned. It's all the free gift of God in Jesus Christ. That's what we were taught. But here's the thing. Even if in just a small way, we were also taught that it needed to be accepted. Works really were still part of the picture. They were different, for sure. Some might even say they weren't works at all. But they were still something that we needed to do. No, we didn't need to go to Mass or to confession or to receive Holy Communion, but we still needed to accept God's gift in Jesus. We still needed to take some kind of action to receive it. Because while God's gift was freely given in Jesus, it needed to be received by saying a certain prayer, by confessing our need for it, by actually making some kind of conscious decision to embrace it. Works, even if they were rather small ones, were still required. And so rather than understanding Jesus coming to reveal something that humanity had so completely misunderstood, namely that faith, that a relationship with God were about law, the Protestant party line became that grace was God's free gift that people needed to receive. And in so doing that, even Protestantism lost a good part of what grace truly is. Are you with me? Grace is not free if it is something I need to receive. If it is something that I need to somehow magically appropriate to my own life. It's not free if I first need to say some kind of a prayer in order to receive it. God's grace is free and unconditional love. And it is for everyone. It just is. Think about it this way for a moment. Let's just say that the first humans had been taught that in order to keep from floating off into space, they needed to wear lead sandals on their feet to hold them down. Can you imagine with me for a moment that line of thinking? What if throughout history, people of every race and tribe wore all kinds of lead shoes in order to keep them from floating into the clouds? Because that's what they had been taught. They donned lead Nikes, lead high heels, lead flip-flops, lead boots, lead Toms. Everyone wore something with lead on their feet so that they would remain weighed down with their feet firmly planted on solid ground. So they didn't float off into outer space. Can you imagine that? But then, some rebel, probably in bare feet, he comes along and he starts telling people that none of this lead shoe stuff is really true. We don't need lead shoes to hold our feet to the ground because there's this thing called gravity to hold everything down. And the shoes, lead shoes, really don't accomplish very much at all. So we can stop wearing them. They're expensive. They're uncomfortable. And frankly, they're not really doing anything for us or for anyone else. So we can just take them off and put them aside. Like church law. Like religious law. We can just stop with all of it. We can put it all aside. Because when it comes to our relationship with God, that law, it's not doing anything. You see, here's the thing. When it comes to gravity, we don't need to accept the fact that it exists in order for it to be real. In order for us to experience its effects upon our lives. We don't need to make any kind of statement affirming the reality of gravity. We don't even need to really believe in it. Gravity just is. And so when we take off lead shoes, gravity will continue to do what gravity has always done. It will become our new lived reality. And that new reality has the capacity to change everything about our day. Everything about the way we live our lives. Friends, that's how grace works. Grace is the unconditional love and acceptance of our Creator God. And faith is about just learning to live into this new reality. It's about a deepening experience with this kind of love and how it then shapes us and transforms us so that we might better share it with others and give it away sacrificially, the way Jesus did. And it's about our refusing to become distracted by law, by doing religious things, so much so that we lose sight of our being, of our identity as beloved children of God. It's about refusing to sacrifice our being on the altars of doing. Being is at the heart of this Mary Oliver poem this morning. The lily does nothing but stand in the garden in order to be a lily. And that is enough. That is enough. Just being who or what we were created to be is enough. Recognizing that we are the very good and dearly loved creation of a holy God, that is enough. And the more we live into this reality and come to terms with the implications of it, the more our lives are transformed. Shan and I spent last week in Puerto Rico. And while it was a beautiful island, like so many colonized territories, we also saw a great deal of poverty. And so as we drove around the island, I realized how incredibly different my world and my life is from so many of the Puerto Ricans. There are so many places around the world where people don't have the privilege of looking at their lives and thinking about how they might make the world a better place. Rather, they are just consumed by simply trying to survive, simply trying to make it through another day. Most of us here in this country, in this church, often without even thinking about it, we enjoy the privilege of expecting so much more out of our lives, asking bigger questions with answers that have the capacity to truly make a difference on things like climate change, war, poverty. We have the privilege of trying to change the world for the better, and we're not distracted by just trying to survive another day. But with that privilege comes the possibility of being distracted. We can easily become so consumed by all that we have the privilege of being able to do that we forget to simply be. Does that make sense? I'm not saying that doing is in any way bad. Don't get me wrong. It is a privilege for which I am most grateful. But one of the banes of this blessing is that in our doing, we become tempted to find our identity there, in our doing. And as if that was not bad enough, we try to make our doing mandated for everyone else so that they might live exactly the way we live, consumed by law. And when it comes to faith and spirituality, these laws to hold us accountable, to hold others accountable, to what we think faith and spirituality all about, they just lead us astray. And with every law, we drift further and further from God's grace. Galatians 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, they are all about grace. And Paul goes on and on, over and over again, chapter after chapter, talking about circumcision. But don't miss his point. He's doing everything he can to point out the contrast between a life under the law and a life under grace. A life where our relationship with God is not determined by a list of mandated rites and rituals, but rather a life that truly grasps the unconditional, unmerited love of the divine. This is what makes grace so incredibly amazing. How many times have you heard me say that? This understanding of what grace is what makes it so amazing. And here, I need to point out something that I often try to gloss over in our congregation, hoping people won't notice it. In fear of offending them, I make this little change that I hope no one will really notice. It's been actually happening for several years now. This morning's closing hymn is going to be this hymn, Amazing Grace. And the reason I don't give the hymn number whenever we sing it, and instead encourage people to sing the words that are on our screens, is because the words in the hymnal, the words that most of us know, they simply do not really reflect either God's view or Jesus' view of humanity. I know some of you don't like it when we change words to old hymns, but we simply have to stop singing words that we do not believe. I don't care how sentimental they might be, we have to change them if we want our faith to grow, and if we want the faith that we pass on to our children to be more accurate. So, let me simply say to you this morning, in the spirit of amazing grace, you are not a wretch. You and I, along with every other human being that has ever been created, we are indeed flawed, and we are imperfect, and we are broken, but we are not wretches. And so we've got to stop singing that. At times, yes, we've all been lost and blind, but we are not wretches in need of saving. We do need to be found. We do need to have our sight restored, but we need to be able to make those claims without in any way diminishing our standing as the very good recipients of God's amazing grace. And none of that is trite. None of it is simple. Because if you stop and think about it, and are willing to alter the way you understand your stance before God, then the consequences truly do have the capacity to change everything. For you, for our world. So this morning, be like a lily. Just be. Be the dearly loved child of God that you are. And as that reality warms our hearts, may it also radically transform our lives again and again and again. And to God be all the glory. Amen. Friends, have a great week. I'll be wrapping up this series next Sunday morning, so finish reading the book of Galatians on your own, and we'll see you right back here next Sunday on Facebook Live